Thank you for watching, liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing right now. We all have networks of some kind, and some of us have many computers on our networks. Maybe 2, 4, 6, 8, 16, 32, 64, 1,000. It doesn't matter. I mean, if you're dealing with more than one machine on a network, inevitably, you're going to need tools to help you manage that network, whether you're a home network or you're a corporate network. If you're on a network of computers, you're going to need help. And that's why we love talking to Josh here over at SolarWinds.net. In fact, if you go to SolarWinds.com/LockerGnome, there's the interviews that we've done before with Josh, and as well as links to all the tools from SolarWinds. And today, what we thought we'd do is talk specifically about troubleshooting user performance on a network, since that's something that I know I personally deal with, and I was curious as to Josh's take and tips on troubleshooting through any of these things that just would seemingly be easy to detect, but are really flying under the radar and really taking down the overall performance of our network that we don't even realize.
Yeah, I mean, Chris, like you said, networks today, even at home, I think there's probably, at any given moment, 12 to 15 computers or systems, even on my home network, let alone at work where there may be thousands of devices. And, networks today are more complex than they used to be, and we're using them for a lot of different types of applications, be video like we're doing right now,
Mm-hmm.
or voice over IP, or, some other telephony type resource. There's lots of different things we use the network for, and they're many times very, very bandwidth intensive. And so, knowing how to troubleshoot both outages, and real like fault-oriented problems and performance problems, it's something you need to be able to do both at home and at work, and all the way around.
So, how do you start in terms of just narrowing down the problem?
Well, I'll tell you, Chris. The first three rules of troubleshooting networks. You've probably heard this before. But it's check the cable, check the cable, check the cable, right? And I've seen this both in home networks. I've seen this in corporate networks. I actually, in a previous life, worked on a problem on Sprint's network that we worked on forever, and it finally came down on a very high bandwidth circuit to a one little 3 foot patch cord that was having a problem. And so always start by checking the cables. Now the difficult part of that in a corporate environment or even a small business can be that you have 20, 30, 1,000 computers all plugged into these Ethernet switches. How do you know which cable to check?
Yeah.
Fairly straightforward at home with a handful of computers, but when you have hundreds of users and they're complaining, you walk into a wiring closet, and you've probably been in a few of these before. I know some of the wiring closets I've been into. Some of them are pretty organized, some of them aren't organized at all. How do you know? At SolarWinds, we provide tools in our engineer's tool set, and one of those is called the switchport mapper, and it actually will detail out for you within only a couple of seconds all the ports on your switch and who's plugged into each port. So when user Mary Jane calls in and complains about having a network problem, you don't have to struggle to figure out which cable is hers to check it. You can know dynamically right then which cable it is, and then go check the cable and move on. And so lots of little things like that can help simplify it.
Well, I know that in my house, I've got, wiring was built with the house. It's, I think, a Cat 5E. And then from there, I'm actually running Cat 6 cable. Is it really like a massive difference for home users in seeing the differences between like a Cat E or a Cat 6 if they're trying to push a lot of these media connections through, like,
You know,
Slingbox or, as you noted, voice over IP stuff and
yeah.
whatnot?
Not really. I think, where you start to see differences in impedance and performance on those types of cabling is typically when you're using gigabit connections, which most home users won't be using, or when you have, a cable that you're trying to extend over a long distance. And so, in a home environment, unless you have a really, really big home, it's not too big a deal. Whereas in a corporate environment where you may have a developer at the end of a connection who wants to run gigabit or maybe even 10 gigabit nowadays, and maybe it's the full 90 meters between his computer and the switch, the Cat 6 might be a good investment. But for most home users, Cat 5 is just fine.
In terms of network performance, I've had many people ask me this. Does turning on wireless actually impede the wired connections between computers on the same network?
It's a great question, and you can actually use some of the tools in the tool set, the SolarWinds tool set, which again, like you mentioned, solarwinds.com/LockerGnome. to go download free copies of those things and try them out. But you can use those tools to actually measure performance of the network before and after you implement a change, like wireless technology. And I always recommend people baseline what they're doing first, make the change, and then see how it changes it. I would say that, if you're having trouble with network performance and you have wireless at home or at work, a couple of things that you should do, especially at home, is number one, you visit the vendor's website for the hardware and see if there's a firmware update for your access point. That can make a tremendous difference in how it performs. And then, of course, if you're using 2.4 gigahertz, megahertz, wireless phones at home, of course, they interfere with 802.11 networks. And so there are a lot of little things in a home network that might cause you actually to have a more complicated wireless scenario than you would at work, where all the phones are wired, everything's sort of controlled. In a home environment, there's a lot more ways to have interference. Your neighbors may all have access points, maybe they're all on the same frequency.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of things you can do to tune that.
You mean the 900 megahertz phones, 2.4 gigahertz phones, et cetera, et cetera.
That's right. Yeah, the 2.4 gigahertz are really well known for interfering with today's wireless technology. So you really want to stay away from that. If wireless performance is key. Now, for general users, it may not be a big deal, but if you're doing high bandwidth applications like voice and video and things like that, then you might want to go back, either downgrade to a 900 megahertz phone or go to a newer phone or move over to an in-series wireless access point.
Has it ever, in your experience, have you ever heard of a situation where, going through all these troubleshooting steps and trying to identify a computer on a large network, cable's fine, the software's fine, the hardware seems to be fine, but it was some kind of external factor that was causing a problem?
Oh yeah, absolutely. All, the bandwidth that we use out there at some point is shared. So even if you're on a switched environment where your access to the corporate network may be dedicated to your use, at some point you're sharing bandwidth with other users. And so many times you may find that your network performance is impeded by a virus on someone else's computer, or a SQL worm that got injected and is causing bandwidth issues. And you can use tools like in the tool set, in the engineer's tool set, there's actually a tool called NetFlow Real-Time. And it lets you analyze the traffic on the network so you can see which machines are generating the most traffic in terms of what applications and what protocols and where they're going. So you can kind of tell, well, I'm having problems. Are they problems generated by my computer? Do I have another application running that's actually causing my own problem? Or is it someone else on the network? I need to let somebody know. And so there are a lot of tools you can use to diagnose those issues. And probably first and foremost, just knowing that many of the applications you use do consume bandwidth, and using those all at the same time may or may not be a great idea.
What do you believe is the greatest threat to networks in general in the coming years? Is it legitimate applications like Skype or some type of voice over IP, or whether it's pushing media down the pike, or is it something more insidious like a virus, a worm, a Trojan, something that pushes a zombie, or computers that are turned into zombies? Which one is more of a threat that network administrators, whether they're hobbyists or all the way to professionals, what do they have to be watching out for in terms of traffic patterns? What do you believe? And maybe this is a personal, professional opinion. I'm just curious as to your thoughts.
Chris, it's a good question. I tend to think that as far as viruses go and things of that nature, we're starting to get a good handle on that from a network perspective. All of the network gear today is smarter about detecting those things in real time, and it's becoming less and less of a problem. What I do think that network administrators, both small and large, whether it's a home network or a corporate network, should be aware of is that the idea of having real-time collaborative media like video conferencing and voice over IP and things like that is really just barely starting to take off. And I was at a trade show 2 weeks ago at Cisco Networkers Live in Orlando, and John Chambers, CEO for Cisco, talked a little bit about how he believes that this evolution, the revolution in the industry around collaboration, around virtualizing ourselves online is really going to be affecting networks down the road. And I actually agree with him pretty strongly, because in a corporate environment where we used to use the web or the internet or our own network for data sharing and email and things like that, now instead of flying to California for a meeting, we're doing a meeting with Cisco telepresence, and we're all using the bandwidth for that. And instead of actually using maybe a conference room we're using a virtual conference room. And so all those things add tremendous amounts of need for bandwidth and capacity on the network, far exceeding anything we've seen in the past. So I think as network administrators, you have to be aware that this is happening pretty quickly, and your users aren't necessarily going to wait until you've said, yeah, it's okay, go ahead and use your
Right.
webcam from your desk, right? They're going to
Yeah.
just start doing it
Yep.
whenever they want to.
Yep.
And so, keep that in mind that you need to be a few steps ahead of those users. So if you're a network administrator, but you're not a technical user, meaning you're not on the edge like you, Chris. Maybe you're an administrator, but you don't do telepresence, and you don't do things like we're doing right now, and you're just not have never seen Flickr or any of those sites. You need to start exploring some of that. You get a user within your community or within your company that is on the bleeding edge, that does push the limits, and start thinking about how you would manage your network if everybody in the company was that type of user. And so that to me is the biggest challenge facing us.
We get a lot of people asking about various tweaks, whether they're on Windows and asking about registry tweaks, or Linux and tweaking every little aspect of their network. And specifically the configuration in the operating system. Are many of the ones that have been more popular, are they really valid? Like tweaking the MTU or tweaking, how much, how many? I'm trying to think of the different, the various and sundry tweak. That's the one that pops out in my mind right now, because I remember it was one of the first ones that hit back in the days of dial-up. And I mean, that was long before a lot of people had access to networks. I mean, from a home perspective. But even in a corporate environment, is there a lot that can be done with optimization in software and networks?
There is, and a lot of that is done, manually today. And so between, you're tweaking your MTU or your TCP window size, there are things you can do specifically based upon the type of performance you're trying to get to optimize that. So, for me as an advanced user, if I'm about to start a really, really large download, then I might go tweak my own settings in terms of MTU and window size and stuff for that setting. But then for that download, when I'm done, I might put it back. And so I think that the hard part about doing that, manually, is you can't necessarily predict what type of traffic the user will be sending. And so there are network appliances out there that actually will do some of that dynamically for you. And between different compression algorithms and caching mechanisms, then they speed that up a lot. There's a lot of new technology in terms of WAN optimization to really optimize the way the traffic flows over the corporate network back and forth through the internet. And so there's some really cool stuff out there. And the good news is with tools, again, like in our tool set and in Orion, as a matter of fact, you can actually monitor the network to see how those settings affect your performance and how that optimization impacts it. So that by investing in a WAN optimization appliance, you've actually saved 30% or 50% of the bandwidth requirements you had before.
Gosh, I would die for that. I mean, the best I can do is, again, from my perspective, is run like one of those speed test tools to see if any, and usually the gains are very, very slim. But seemingly, the more machines that I put on this network, I mean, not just, and this is going to lead into a question that one of the persons in the chat room just asked, which I know is something that's going to be on the minds of many of your customers. As we add more of these machines to the network, they become more complex. So the need for good management tools becomes, that much more important, and these tweaks become that much more important. In your tool set, is the user just dropped into it, or is there really a procedure to help guide them through? What kind of market is this tool going after specifically?
Well, the engineer's tool set is really marketed toward, network administrators or engineers who have access to not just configure those PCs that are on the network, but to configure the infrastructure equipment, the routers and switches and the access points and things like that. So that's the people who have access to those devices are the ones that this tool set is really geared for. And so within the tool set, there's a thing called the SolarWinds Launchpad, which actually gives you a real easy way to sort of get familiar with all the different applications and what they do. And each time you click on one, it gives you a little description of what that tool does, what kinds of problems it can help you solve, as a real entry point to help you figure out sort of how to use that tool to help you. There are about 50 different tools in the tool set, and most engineers have their favorite, 5 or 10 that they use, real commonly every week. I certainly have my favorites. But what's interesting to me is, there are about 50,000 customers using that product, And a tool that I might hardly ever use would be someone else's favorite tool. And so it's really kind of just a taste type thing and a style of how you go about managing the network. But definitely, if you're out there managing a network and you need help, it's the kind of tool that is built not to do the work for you, but to really enhance your skills as a technician or engineer, so that you can be more successful at managing the network yourself.
Well, I can only imagine that a tool like this is going to be extremely helpful for people who are still in school studying to become a network administrator.
That's right.
And I mean, I'm saying this in all honesty. Every day I get at least one email. People watch me on YouTube. They follow me in the blog, Twitter, friend feed, whatever. At least one person asked me from a variety of countries all around the world, Chris, I want to go into something related to technology. What should I do? How do I, where do I start? Where do I begin? And for me, it's difficult to give that kind of advice. Number one, I'm not a guidance counselor. Number two, I've always learned on my own through the help of software and just kind of playing around and like, oh, okay, so if I do this and this and this, then this will happen. And that's really how, I guess I grew with my knowledge. So it's good to know that the tool is there as, an enhancement and really a growth opportunity for someone who's in school or someone who wants to advance their career, and specifically in network administration.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of technical colleges, schools, high schools, colleges, places that teach like Microsoft training and Cisco training, a lot of those facilities will use our software as part of the class, and even give out, copies of the CDs for their students to be using. It's very, very popular for that use. It's referencing a lot of books on the same subject. But you're right, and I would tell anyone who's interested in getting into the field to be like you, Chris, in that you have to be inquisitive and just go start trying stuff, right? I mean, if you're easily intimidated by technology, you'll never be good at technology, because the way that we all learn it is we just start trying stuff till we figure out something that works. And so the tool set is, right?
Yeah, we keep breaking stuff. That's right.
You have to, and you can't be the kind of person who's especially learning all from a book, because as soon as you read that book and buy it, the next wave of technology comes out the road and it's all new again. And what the tool set is really meant to do is just sort of empower you as an inquisitive technical person, as an engineer, to learn more about the technology and to be able to do things you might not have done before. So it really, when I start using the tool set, I don't go anywhere on site without it. It just sort of lets me have a streamlined way of finding out about that person's network and diagnosing problems, as opposed to having to do it all by hand.
All right, well, here's a question, at least one, and I know this is going to hit my audience perfectly, as well as I know yours. It says, he was asking, not talking about lag in games, but how much bandwidth does it take that others on a network could want to use? So he's talking specifically about gaming traffic on a network, whether it's game consoles or likely PC-based gaming. Does that take up a lot? I mean, is that ruin?
Well, it depends. So, first of all, when you think about bandwidth usage and things like gaming, or even things like, sharing a webcam like we're doing right now, you have to think about both bandwidth that stays on your network, so two users as peers playing a game, versus a user playing a game with someone across the internet. Because your internet bandwidth is always going to be significantly more constrained than your internal bandwidth on your corporate network. So, while I've worked at many, many companies where we would get together in the evenings and have, World of Warcraft tournaments or Doom tournaments back in the old days, or Quake or Hexen or all those games I used to play a lot. And that would be all internal traffic, and the infrastructure is built to maintain that, and you really don't see an impact of that whatsoever. Where you start to see an impact is where, you've got a limited amount of bandwidth out to the internet, and you've got 10 guys in the engineering department all playing World of Warcraft logged onto a server which is out on the internet, consuming bandwidth there. And so that can cause a significant amount of bandwidth usage. But again, I would encourage you to measure that with a tool like what's in the tool set and see exactly how much it is. And you can actually go to SolarWinds.com, and there's a real-time server, an online demo server, which is monitoring a real network. You can actually see some sample charts and data of where you can see World of Warcraft users using the network and how much traffic they're using. And so, go check that out. It just depends on the company and how much bandwidth they have available and what compression they use. There's lots of ways around it. The advantage, again, of having it on a central network, on one network, is when you optimize, you usually have to have access to both ends of the connection. And so, if you have a corporate network and you have offices in San Jose and Austin, Texas, and we're playing a game between us, we can optimize around that. But if I'm in Austin, Texas, playing a game with someone in Singapore that I never met across an internet connection, I can't optimize that performance very well. And so that's the kind of performance that can really degrade other business critical applications.
All right, well, Josh, I think that's about all for now. The sun's starting to come
Okay.
out here, so I better go enjoy it while I can.
It's been raining all afternoon here in Texas, and we needed it, so I'm glad to see
Whoa!
it.
So we like swapped weather patterns there.
That's
Oh,
right.
that's great. Well, I'm certainly going to ask everybody for their network optimization tips, specifically if you've done something that has helped improve your network, whether at work or at home. It's always something that I'm always looking into, and when I find anything, I'm just thrilled to death because even the smallest change can make the biggest difference, as Josh can attest. So solarwinds.com/lockerdome, check it out. We've got all the video interviews we've done there, as well as links to special downloads and whatnot. And we certainly appreciate Josh's time.
Absolutely.
I like doing interviews. I don't know, it's just kind of I've got nothing else to do with these monitors, other than just talk to people virtually over the network, I guess. And look, and plus I can do that. I'm just kidding. This is so cute. So anyway, my email address is chris@pirillo.com. I promise not to do that again. I won't. And you can find me streaming live pretty much every day. And people, by the way, in the chat room, they're thanking you for stopping by, Josh.
Oh, great. Well, I appreciate the opportunity, Chris. I always have fun. So
Good. Well, that's if nothing else. I mean, we got to spice it up somehow. But I am streaming live over my network here, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week at live.pirillo.com. We'll see you later.
thanks, bud.